Hello, hello. This is Conscious Embodiment with Dr. Michael Lennox. We're coming at you for the week of December 5th. Hey, Michael, what is the weather?
What is the weather? Well, the weather's interesting this week. We got a lot of planetary changes with Venus and Mercury changing signs. We got a full moon coming up, and I'm going to break the fourth wall here and just talk about my own experience. Like, Zoe and I are actually recording today on a day where I don't feel well. And here's a nod to the Mars in retrograde, kids. Mars is in my sixth house of the body and health, moving the body on a daily basis. And so I thought, oh, what a perfect time to deepen my relationship to my physical fitness, which I've changed over the last year or so, moved away from the sort of heavy-duty CrossFit throwing barbells around to a more appropriate, 59-year-old version. And, well, that is not what's happening. I fell on my stairs and have whiplash in my shoulder. I have had two colds. Ever since Mars moved back into my sixth house, we've not been happy in the body. And so I'm having to completely reinvent how I'm approaching Mars retrograding and what house he's moving through. So I'm sharing this with you guys because it's, another reminder that this Mars retrograde is, means business. And he's fully sort of backward moving and into the process. So if you don't know what house is ruled by Gemini in your natal chart, go find out what it is, because that's where some of the juice of shift and change and transformation is going on with regard to actions and physical experience in the body. And it's just another reminder that since I don't talk about Mars retrograde every week unless he's doing something that week, and he's not this week, not of note at any rate. Do not forget that we are in a difficult and potentially challenging backward retrograde process with Mars. All of November, all of December, and half of January. So
I am definitely looking up my chart right after this. I always forget. It's like, of course I've seen my chart, but in the day-to-day, I can't quote it like some of my friends can.
Right. And the value of being able to quote it now is certainly that if the house placement of where Mars is going retrograde, it might just give you some context for an experience you're having. Like if I didn't have this notion that the physical challenges that I've had, which I have emotional reactions to, like I don't like feeling fatigued or unable to move my body in the way that my body is designed. I am someone who thrives with physical movement. There's actually genes for that. I have a slight elite athleticism in my genes, courtesy of my mom's side of the family. She had athletic talent. I have no talent. I have the gene for stamina, meaning my body loves to be moved at a very intensified level. I just can't throw a ball. So balls are not involved unless it's a, slam ball in a CrossFit gym. All right. Enough about Mars in the retrograde. Check out Gemini in your charts, kids, because that's where there's a lot of juice. Could be helpful to just recheck in with yourself about how the Mars retrograde is going. We do have both Mercury and Venus changing signs this week. So let's just talk about Mercury first, because that's the first one to go. And tomorrow, December 6th, Mercury's going to move into Capricorn. This is going to change our communication dynamic quite dramatically. In fact, the shift between Mercury and Sagittarius and Mercury into Capricorn is very grounding. Very much the brakes get put on in a way that's probably positive. Mercury's not so happy in Sagittarius. It's an overstimulated mansion for the planet of communication who wants to be precise and exacting with words. That's not really possible with Mercury and Sagittarius. And by virtue of moving into Saturn's sign, Capricorn, where it's an earth sign, so it's about slowing down and getting grounded. It's a cardinal earth sign. Cardinal energy is about starting things up and moving things forward as a kind of initiation energy. And that's powerful for communication. Capricorn wants to know what the ultimate goal is, and all goals are attained through mind, thought, and conversation and connection. So you can expect all communication to get a little bit more grounded, a little bit more purposeful, and a little bit more sort of sober starting tomorrow. That's the good news. The bad news is we're entering retrograde territory. So Mercury will stay in Capricorn for the next 10 and a half weeks, as opposed to the 2.5 weeks that he moves through a sign when he's moving at his regular pace. So we'll talk about this as the month goes on, because the juicy stuff doesn't happen quite yet with the retrograde. Just the ingress is tomorrow. Just for those of you who want to know, I'll throw out the dates now. Mercury will start his shadow on December 12th, and then he'll turn around on December 29th. So that means the retrograde section, the backward moving portion, is mostly in January of 2023. And so we enter next year with Mercury already retrograde. But the first act, where all of the issues that might be problematic during the retrograde, that's in the retrograde shadow. That's between the 12th and the 29th. And we will talk about this next week, because next week's podcast starts with the day this begins. But in a general sort of way, we will benefit from Mercury getting into a more grounded and stable sign, even if we have to contend with a retrograde later in the month and into next year. I think that given the state that people are in these days and in this lunar cycle, we will feel a positive shift in a more sort of grounded sensibility as first Mercury moves into Capricorn and later in the week, Venus follows suit.
Something that I think is like, I mean, it must be in astrology, but I know a lot of people who've been breaking up over the last few weeks, myself included, which I think is interesting. I don't know if that's like directly related.
Absolutely, and here's why. We're just coming out of a lunar cycle in Scorpio, which is death and rebirth, change and transformation, going deeply in to the sort of inner landscape to allow for a death and a rebirth to occur. That was the juicy visit to the underworld, that once we moved into this lunar cycle, which was essentially 2 weeks ago, Sagittarius is all about what is true. Scorpio would be about like, let me go inside and figure out what is important to me. What am I willing to change and transform? What am I willing to die for? Once we moved into the truth-telling consciousness of Sagittarius, then it was time to trigger changes externally that were brewing internally in the last lunar cycle. I talked about this in a couple of places.
Oh.
Yeah,
yes.
You get it, right? That's the point.
So everyone's kind of ruminating, maybe this needs to change.
That's right. And once we got into this lunar cycle, anything that inside felt important that we came to with last month's lunar cycle now then becomes doable, changeable. We can speak into that in the Sagittarius energy.
Yeah.
In fact, this full moon is going to be kind of a deep release experience, you know, maybe more than your average full moon. And in this arena of like what is true on a higher level that we've discovered and where our low level relationship to truthiness gets in the way. That's Sag Gemini. Mm-hmm. Right. So Sagittarius is where we understand the higher truths. Gemini is where we think about things at the level of mind, at the personal level, where we grapple with, well, what's true for me? Gemini allows for polarization to occur. So we have this sort of sense of higher, listen, truth is so subjective, so it's sort of silly to be talking about truth as if there is a truth to land on. But certainly in our world today, one of the biggest, challenges of polarization that we bump into is That's not true, except, it's true for me, true for you. So whatever possibility there is of having a higher agreed upon truth with a capital T is a Sagittarius consciousness. And Gemini is where we in a polarized way consider those truths. And in a full moon in Gemini, we are looking to let go of lower thoughts of debate, criticism, overthinking a truth, all of that sort of lower way that our mind gets in the way of our happiness is releasable in a Gemini full moon. We can talk about what we have to let go of. I mean, I'm sort of trying to dial this into what you just said, of people breaking up in this lunar cycle after deep ruminations last lunar cycle. A full moon in Gemini says something like, I came to a higher truth, Sagittarius, that this isn't working for me. So I must speak into the lower truth of, we got to break up.
Wow. I've had many a breakups in Sagittarius season specifically.
You mean in your past?
And, oh yeah, like 2 years ago,
oh wow,
breakup during Sagittarius season, maybe 2018 or so. Someone broke up with me, and then a couple years before that, I broke up with someone right after Sagittarius season.
Damn, so we got to look at your chart and see what's up with
in and around.
Well, it certainly fits the global archetype.
Oh, absolutely.
Of turning within in Scorpio and then facing the outer landscape in Sag and sort of making shifts and changes. Well, what I love about this particular full moon, which is on Wednesday, sort of evening Pacific time, like 8:07 p.m. Pacific time, is that it's one thing to think about what am I releasing in terms of lower thoughts, polarized thinking, endless debate, anxious mind. We want to make sure that anything we're letting go of turns into long-range behaviors. It's one thing to release something, but if you haven't figured out or learned the lesson, then next Sagittarius season, you're just going to be breaking up again because you didn't figure out how to take what you were learning and put it into new behaviors. And this is why we talked about Mars at the top of today's podcast. It wasn't just to complain about me having a cold again or whiplash in my shoulder from falling on my stairs. This full moon is exactly conjunct Mars, and I mean exact. 16 degrees, 1 minute of Sag is the moon, and 16 degrees and 7 minutes of Gemini is where Mars is. So this full moon is, through the power of precision, directly connected to the long-range behavioral shifts that Mars is taking us through. But the Mars cycle is a long cycle. You can't be in this full moon and really get how what you're letting go of might show up in your life in January and then again in the spring of next year. January is when he turns around and goes direct. Spring is when he finishes the wrap-up. But I can promise you, through the principles of cycles, this full moon directly connects to things we're letting go of that our embodiment consciousness, which is Mars, will take in to our unconscious territory, because that's where he's dwelling by moving backwards. So he's going to receive the imprints of this full moon and carry them with him through the rest of his retrograde cycle. So there may be more things we let go of and we drop as we think of them. Gemini, thoughts. As we think about and speak into the things we need to shift and drop and let go of to have a more vibrant experience of life, Mars will be carrying this energy of the full moon with him through the end of this lunar cycle, but the several up ahead as he finishes his cycle in total. And not for nothing, there's a direct relationship between the Sagittarius sun and the north node of the moon and Uranus, who are still close enough to be conjunct. The north node is where we're going next. It's our North Star. It's our direction maker. North node with Uranus conjunct pretty much all of this year means that we're moving through a time where when we do let things go, many people are experiencing very sudden shifts or changes or track changes or brand new landscapes because of something that was dropped either now or in the last couple of weeks. The sun hitting the north node in Uranus in the great eliminator angle also emphasizes that anything that we are releasing in our overthinking minds this week, courtesy of this full moon, is going directly into our unconscious capacity to create new behaviors that come from a more healed inside that allow us to make choices that will put us on this track or the path to the destiny that we ultimately desire. So this sounds sort of like fun and filled with possibility. Like it's all happening in a matter of like delay and months process, right? It's again, I really want to emphasize this. It is not possible now to know where choices that you're making to let go of things, how that's going to leave you next spring. But I assure you, there's a connection. There's an unconscious guidance connection between the deep dive we did last lunar cycle, the truth we are now marinating in this lunar cycle, that's giving us the courage to move through this week and let go of stuff, even if it's scary to do. And just know that over the next sort of 3, 4, 5 months, you will start to see new behaviors in yourself and in others based on things you're letting go of now. There's a sidebar in this full moon that is juicy, juicy, juicy. And this is an opposition between Pluto, the great transformer, and Black Moon Lilith, who is, by the way, getting ready to leave Cancer and enter Leo next year. I'll talk all about that in my astrology forecast for 2023, which I'm doing on New Year's Day. You can look for information about that when it's coming out. But Black Moon Lilith is important to me and to anyone who follows me because I am all about using astrology to contextualize your inner expansion, your inner healing, the self-actualization that we all must do in order to have the lives that we desire. Black Moon connects to unconscious material that's bubbling up from below the unconscious, but it's like the manhole cover on the sewer of our unconscious, right? Stuff that bubbles up that we trip on. Lilith is added to this. Don't know why Western astrology added Lilith to Black Moon, but it did. And so we have in this sort of juicy unconscious of accessibility through Black Moon Lilith also includes elements of our sexuality, our repressed consciousness, things we've been sort of trying to shove into into that manhole sewer cover. So when we face our Black Moon Lilith material head on with courage, great change and transformation can take place because that's where all of the juicy unconscious stuff is happening. And in the sign of Cancer, it's very much an inside job. Lilith in Cancer for the last month has asked us to turn within, to look at issues of family dynamics and where we come from, mother relationships in particular with Black Moon Lilith in Cancer. And so she's almost done moving through this sign, and it's no mistaking that she spends 9 months moving through a sign. That's a gestational period for the human being. So this opposition is like the penultimate huzzah of Black Moon Lilith before the ultimate move, which is when she moves into Leo at the beginning of next year. opposite Pluto means an undeniable reckoning in this full moon that we are going to bump up against deep needs to change and transform wounds that are typically held below the surface of the unconscious mind. And so with Mars dipping into the unconscious by being backward facing in his retrograde, and the depth and intensity of Pluto's capacity to bring another layer of death so that a rebirth can happen is being triggered in this full moon by the point that allows us to marinate with things that are just below the surface that relate to power, sexuality, and material that if we stop repressing it, will allow us to be more fully self-expressed. So this full moon is both mental and intellectual because of the Gemini presence, but also deeply emotional and sort of shadow consciousness oriented because of this opposition between Black Moon Lilith and Pluto. Trust that you've been doing your good work. If you just need to keep doing that good work, like that's the elegance of astrology, that we're being carried out of the underworld from Scorpio into the truth mansion of Sag and put through this release mechanism, which I'm going to say for the fourth time, I think, today in this podcast, we're a little bit in the dark about the results that the releases now will lead us to, but the setup is to go deep. Allow that and have at it. Well, right now, where Mercury goes, so does Venus. In fact, they came together on November 23rd by conjunction, and that was a really powerful integration of mind and heart, which we're always looking to have our thoughts and our feelings sort of in alignment. And then what happened after the 23rd was they changed places. Mercury started moving faster, and now Mercury does something, and for right now, Venus does it like the next day or a few days later. So, Mercury moves into Capricorn tomorrow, and Venus will follow into Capricorn on Saturday. Like they're far away from each other enough now that their simultaneous hits are happening, 4 days apart now. Venus spends about 3.5 weeks in each sign, but she will actually be going through a retrograde next year during the summer, and that's 2 retrogrades within 2 years, which is about the closest that they ever get. But she's not anywhere near her last one or her next retrograde, so she's moving at her regular pace, and that's 3.5 weeks per sign. Venus is not unhappy in Sagittarius. She likes the stimulation, If there's a love language of Venus and Sag, it's more please and make it different. Now, Venus in Capricorn, very different story. Our emotional body gets Saturn's influence, right? Venus rules our emotional body and how we process our feelings. Venus in Sag is ruled by Jupiter, which means big, go home, express more. You got a feeling, make it sing. Whereas in Capricorn, we're a little bit more reserved, a little bit more sober, a little bit more slow to open up. Certainly people with Venus in Capricorn in their natal charts are slower to open up. But of course, once they do, the loyalty is like forever. And in general, we are guided by Saturn when it comes to matters of the heart, as long as Venus is in Saturn's sign of Capricorn. This is going to help the chaos of the last couple of weeks diminish a little bit. If you remember back when everything was in Scorpio and everything was intense, I would be calling out moments when a planet would leave Scorpio for Sagittarius, and that would signal the end of the layering out of emotional depths into something a little bit more fiery. And so the last couple of weeks, we've been in that fire of Sagittarius, and the shadow of that is chaos, too much thinking, going faster than we can manage, trying to keep up with all of the stimulating feelings that we're having. That when we pass through Venus moving into Capricorn this weekend, everything gets a little bit more stable. It if there is a love language for Venus in Capricorn, it's like, do things for me. Show me. Show me your love in action. But here's what I really, really love about Venus moving into Capricorn, and we are going to talk about this in about 2 weeks on the podcast. At the very end of the year, I think it's right on the 31st of December, so New Year's Eve day. Venus, who's moving into Capricorn on Saturday, will catch up to Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn. This is exactly where Venus retrograded and hung out with Pluto for 2 weeks last December at 27 degrees of Capricorn. That's the beauty of how cycles work. Pluto has moved around a little bit this year, but he doesn't move more than a couple of degrees, and then he retrogrades, and then he goes direct, and so he travels about 3-4 degrees in a year. Venus moves around the entire ecliptic in about a year. So Venus was in Capricorn last December. She'll be in Capricorn again starting Saturday. She has moved around the whole zodiac. How many times have I said this year? Venus hung out with Pluto for 2 weeks early in the year.
Yeah.
She's bringing with her all the transformative power of that 2-week meeting all year long.
Yes.
We are dying and being reborn in the heart because of Venus's 2-week fuckfest with Pluto. So the idea that we end the year with Venus back in Capricorn and a brief meeting with Pluto just as we're saying Happy New Year, to me is so elegant and so beautiful. I know this year has been brutal, kids. I know hearts have been broken. I know you know that, Zoe. It's been rough, but it is not without purpose. And it's cycles like this that drive this home for me. It's one of the reasons why I love astrology so profoundly, because I can look at what we all experienced by a 2-week visit at the beginning of the year between the planet that governs how we give and receive love and the planet that allows us to change the unchangeable. And to finish the year off with like a post-mortem meeting between the planet of love and the planet of death and rebirth is just too elegant to not get excited about. It makes all of the painful aspects of what it is to do this heart-centered work worth it. And I promise you, no matter how difficult the next few years are going to be, and they're going to be, we are more prepared as we enter 2023 to meet life on life's terms because the work that we've done on our hearts at an individual level this year, when we are all better givers and receivers of love, then there's more love to give and receive. Have at it.
All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have a call-in dreamer. Woo! And Nikki's calling in. Hey, Nikki, what you dreaming?
Hey, so I've had this reoccurring dream. It's probably been about 4 times now, and each time I'm in a rush to get someplace, and it's about to close. And this time I was trying to get the post office, and I had no packages, no letters, nothing, but I needed to get to this post office. And every time in my dream, I park kind of like far enough away that I can walk and get there, but there's always obstacles in the way to get to where I'm trying to go. And I'm always trying to make it kind of like a shortcut. So I'm going through all these barriers, and there's cars honking, there's tons of traffic, there's like do not enter signs. And I'm finally going up this hill to get to this kind of like a mall because I know that I can get through that mall and make it a shortcut. So I get to this mall and it just seems like a never ending mall. There's all these shops on my left, and I'm really getting to the point where I'm panicked and emotional and I want to start crying. I want to get through one of these little shops so that I can take the shortcut to get to this post office. So somebody sees me getting emotional and I'm about to start crying, and so they're like, "Hey, can I help you?" "Yeah, sure. Could I cut through your store?" And in real life, I would never
Yeah.
I would never go to some business that I haven't patronized. And so I'm feeling really guilty about that. But he's like, "Yeah, no problem. Just go right through." So I go through this door to get to where I think would be a shortcut to get to the post office. And I open the door, and the post office is even farther away than it would have been. Another thing that I didn't mention was as I'm going down this mall, it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer, and it just seems like I'm never going to get to where I need to go, and it's going to close by the time I actually do get there.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I have this question. I'll explain sort of why I want to ask this, but if you don't mind me telling, me asking that, how old are you?
I am 37.
And so, in your 37-year-old generational sensibility, like, how do you relate to the post office as the right or good way to make connection?
Honestly, the post office is my least favorite place in the world to go. I have packages piled up because
Yes!
I never want to go to the post office. Never.
Okay, so, well, that gives us a clue, right? When you say that you've had this like 4 times as a recurring dream, do you mean like sporadically throughout your life or like in a cluster?
I would say it has been reoccurring within the past year, and each place that I'm trying to get to is not always the post office, it's somewhere else. So if the post office
Okay, so you're bringing the post office today, but it's okay. Yeah. Well, in a very general way, the unsexy sort of interpretation of this is that anything that recurs like this is responding to a stressor where the brain or the psyche says, this stressor and these images match. Mm-hmm. Right. This is why someone might have like lifelong recurring dreams of the tsunami when they're emotionally overwhelmed, because waves of water are like emotional waves. And, so anytime they're emotionally overwhelmed, that recurring image, and I say this a lot on the podcast, if you're under a certain age, your recurring dream is more likely to be zombies because of video games entering the zeitgeist at a certain point. So on a certain fundamental, simple level, Nikki, you're having this dream when you're stressed about accomplishment, things you need to do, things that are about interacting with the world and others, and looking for that fucking shortcut.
Yes.
Now, what's most interesting to me and you about the shortcut is that you are a rule follower.
Yes.
You told us that. You said, I would never. Your tone got a little flustery. It's like, not only would you like never go through a store that you were patronizing, you would never go through a store. Like there was a lot of emphasis on that, right?
Yes.
So that there we then understand some pull between rule following, which is not dissimilar from the mall consciousness. Right? If public spaces in dreams are symbolic of how we relate, and the more public, the more the images about relating with en masse peoples.
Sure.
The mall would be the lowest common denominator human agreement place where people sort of align and say, I like brand, I like this shortcut to prosperity. Like the mall is low common denominator, but social agreement.
Sure.
And so somewhere about, you and trying to meet life on life's terms in the last year or two when, public consciousness has gotten crazy. How are you relating to just, the world gone mad, social media, polarization? I'm assuming you live in the United States. Like, how are you vibing with that?
Actually, I live in Colorado Springs, and we just had that mass shooting. Mm-hmm. Apart from that, I do feel like I've been very homebody, very hermity. I was very much a social butterfly and turned completely opposite of that.
So the pandemic transformed you in this way.
Did.
Well, that is interesting that a recurring dream in the sort of post-pandemic world is showing you bumping up against the relentlessness of social interaction, the difficulties that are in there, the barriers that we bump into when we're trying to react to others. Cars honking, you mentioned, that's like publicly shared stress.
Yes.
The do not enter signs is like, oh, okay, you can go here, but you can't go there. And now it's confusing. Where do I get to go? What do I get to say? Who do I get to insult?
Right.
If I say, all this stuff, all of that consciousness is a reminder, especially now that we know that you went from sort of social butterfly to hermit-like, sequestered living. These dreams are helping you navigate life on life's terms, especially as it regards to public shared chaos as represented by the mall. And then there's this sense that you can get to it, but at the end of the day, what is the dream's message? The message is you can't.
Right.
And that's what we all have to sort of grapple with, like, in the world gone mad, it's like we want the world to go back to the pre-madness, but we don't get that luxury. I want to address this, that the shops were on your left, because you said that. Any sense of what was on your right, given that you had this memory of shops on the left?
Oh, yes.
Ooh.
In the email, I misspoke and I said the shops were on my right, but they were all on my left. And as I was passing by each shop, there was one, this is so silly, it was a cowboy boot store. And I stopped to listen to this man say, these boots are fucking outrageous. Why would you charge this much? And I kind of watched him and he was trying them on and he was like, well, they're actually really, really nice, And then I went, after I passed the cowboy boot store, there was a lighting store and that was the person that helped me.
Ooh,
yes.
Okay, I like that. All right, so a man with boots complaining about them. That's like, remember, it's part of you. This isn't some other random man, unless some man had a dream about going to a mall and he hasn't called in yet. But one day, if someone calls in with, like, I tried on some boots and I hated them, we will reach out and let you know.
Oh, thank you.
Right, but we've got these, like, two options. One is sort of status quo. The man in the boots is like masculine principle consciousness, which is, by the way, the right side, not the left. The left is about receptivity, feminine approach. So it's interesting that you get this bump into, I could choose to walk this way. I could put on these boots and walk this way. But they're not right. They're a problem. They're not the right boots, not even for the part of you that would make the masculine choice of doing. It ain't the right set of boots anymore. I'm reminded herein that like 2 years ago, these might have been the boots of social interaction and walking around and moving about.
Ooh, that's good.
But now you can't dance in those boots anymore. They're not the right boots for your walking.
Yeah.
What do you need now? You need something more of light. The left side is about receptivity, connection to flow, and moving through the world in those marvelous, irrational ways that we fuck up when we take action or get too aggressive or let anger, masculine principle, dominate. So as you're walking through this mall, you don't move towards the shops on your left. That would be more distraction, old way of doing something. You eschew the boots that no longer fit or are no longer right for you, and you're guided by the light, somebody who owns how to light the space up more beautifully, more effectively, is where you get to the shortcut that you seek. So there's a message there. Yeah. Watch the actions that you used to take. They won't serve you any longer. We want to be more receptive and in flow and move towards the light. But there's a second message, Nikki. You may get to the shortcut, but even there, you get through the door. The freaking post office is even further away because shortcuts don't work.
Yeah. That is the most frustrating part of all of these dreams is I never get to where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah,
I hate that. And that's...
But understand, that very frustration is the power of the dream. Mm-hmm. The part of you that can be graceful with change and moving about in the new way doesn't need any help. Not from me and not from your psyche. The light fills in all the spaces. What needs our help is where we constrict, where we say no, where we shrink back, where we put on the wrong pair of boots and walk in the wrong direction. Right? So that looking for the shortcut to connect in a new way or again, then we actually have this sort of this kerfuffle of the fact that at the end of the day, you hate the post office. So it's kind of, right? So then the shortcut to the post office might also be, is there a way for me to do the things I have to do that I hate to have to do, but with a shortcut so that they're not as hateful or not as problematic, not as, avoidable? And the answer is no.
Right.
You can move towards the light, which is a good idea, because it will bring you grace and more light on the path, but the shortcut doesn't work. Inevitably, you've got to, we all have to move through life on life's terms.
Absolutely. I just need to suck it up.
My new spiritual mantra, honey. Suck it up.
Suck it up.
Well, that goes right after snap out of it. So, well, thank you so much for sharing your dream with us today. Really,
thank you.
Delightful.
I appreciate your time so very much.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.